Hello, welcome back to the PMP Underline series. My name is Salahuddin Qazi, and in today's session, we will cover project initiation. And project initiation can generally be considered as covering these three steps, which is to develop your project charter, to identify your stakeholders, and with that, you start to build your project team. And in the student manual, the topics that we want to discuss as project initiation is broadly covered in Lesson 1 Topic G and Lesson 1 Topic A. One of the first things that you would develop as part of project initiation is the project vision statement. Now, any organization would have a future vision of how they see themselves, and this particular project is going to fulfill a part of that vision. An organization will end up doing multiple projects so that they reach from the current state to that desired future state. And the project vision statement will describe what are their deliverables and what are the outcomes that is expected or desired out of this particular project. And since this is a document that's prepared very early in the project, we are grouping that as part of project initiation. And the idea of having the project vision statement is for the teams to be able to understand what is the future view and expectation out of this project. Therefore, some of the key components that would be put in the project vision statement would include a description of the project objectives and the deliverables, what the desired outcome is, what will be the strategic approach that would be applied to this project, and what is the business benefit that can be achieved by completing this project successfully. While a project vision statement establishes a clear view of the project future, the idea of the project charter is to be able to summarize or provide a high-level view of the project that you're working on. Many times, if the project manager is not yet assigned, now would be the time to have a project manager assigned to the project. And the project manager can work very closely with the sponsor or the project initiator to be able to complete what the project charter is meant to be, which is an overview or a summary of the whole project. And when the charter gets prepared finally, it will get approved by the project initiator or the sponsor, and that's what makes the project charter an official document. And this therefore allows the project manager to be able to utilize the company funds and the resources. The key contents of the project charter would primarily be summarizing the project, which includes summarizing the timeline, the budget, some of the key assumptions and the constraints that are applicable to the project, any risks that get identified at this stage, and a list of key stakeholders for the project. In addition to this, the charter would have some of the key project objectives listed and also capture some of the key project or the product requirements. And a charter will also have a summary of the justification of why the project is being done. And this can be borrowed from a business case. And with that, you'll be able to link this project with the business objectives. And that could have been described in the project vision statement we just talked about. Let's take a moment to quickly understand the tools that you might use to be able to develop your charter. So let's take three scenarios. Scenario one is that the project that you're working on is one of the internal projects, and for which you might have a business case that's already existing for the project. And the business case would describe why the organization should be doing the project, what the benefits would be, what funds are required to do the project, how long will it take to complete the project, and so on. And in that case, you can analyze the business case and extract all the information that's relevant to be put in the project charter. Another scenario is that you are a contractor, and the reason that your organization is doing this project is because you won this as part of the tender process. So more than likely, there is an agreement or some form of contract with your client. And again, in this case, if you're a project manager and you want to write the project charter, why reinvent the wheel? Analyze the contract or the agreement, extract the information that you're looking for to be able to put in a charter in a summary or a high-level format. That's another example for document that you can review. This is in the scenario where you're a contractor or your client is external to the organization. How about the scenario where this project is because of an innovative idea, or in the scenario where the objective is known, the problem is known, but the solution is not known, and the project is meant to achieve that solution? What can you do in this case? If you have to develop the charter, you may not have a lot of documents to refer to. So in that case, tools become much more highlighted. Now, of course, you will use the tools as applicable, but in this particular scenario where you have no documents that we can refer to, you might end up doing more meetings. You might start taking advice from people within or outside the organization, and that is expert judgment. And you may call one or more meetings with all the relevant stakeholders, including the project initiator, maybe certain subject matter experts, and hence you will do a combination of taking advice from people, which is expert judgment, or conducting meetings with the relevant stakeholders. Let's move on to discuss project stakeholders. And stakeholders are a group of individuals who are either working on a project, who are waiting for the project to complete, or who are expecting the project to complete, or individuals who are contributing to the project, who's sponsoring the project, or who will benefit from your project, or who's getting impacted by your project. So collectively, all of them are for you, your project stakeholders. And one of the segment from your project stakeholders is your project team. And after we finish discussing, identifying, and analyzing the stakeholders, we'll spend some time to discuss how do you start to build your project team. You can apply several techniques to be able to identify your stakeholders. You could refer to some of the past projects. You may do expert judgment, which is to take advice or consult with somebody internal or external to the organization. This may include project initiator, maybe another project manager that has done a similar project in the past. Other techniques that you can apply is maybe follow the trail of approvals, maybe follow the trails of finance, maybe, as they say, follow the money. Another technique that you can apply is to consult the stakeholders who've already identified and ask them to see if there are some additional stakeholders that should be included in the stakeholder register. Now, once you have your stakeholders identified, we know that not all stakeholders are equally important or relevant to your project. They are your stakeholders, but not everybody is equally important. So what you would end up doing next is analyzing the stakeholders so that you can prioritize them from, say, more important stakeholders going all the way down to less important and less relevant stakeholders. And now that you have your stakeholders identified, who are all listed in the stakeholder register. Stakeholder register, by the way, is an artifact. And generally speaking, an artifact is any document or any plan that you prepare in your project. One of the most common techniques used to analyze the stakeholders and to be able to prioritize your stakeholders is to use what is called as a grid. Basically, a grid would apply two parameters, and one of the most widely used pair of parameters to analyze your stakeholders is power and interest. Power here refers to the ability of the stakeholders to affect or impact your project. This necessarily doesn't translate to position in the organization. It's all about how much does this particular stakeholder has the ability to affect or impact your project. And all you would have to do is give them a score of high or low. And for each stakeholder, you'll give a score of high or low. And similarly, when you analyze the same stakeholder for their interest in your project, again, you'll give them a score of a high or a low. And by doing this, you would have grouped your stakeholders into 4 segments. And the most important group of stakeholders for you would be the stakeholders who have high interest and high power. And your strategy on how you want to manage these stakeholders would be to manage them very closely. So you've done your analysis, and every stakeholder who has a high power and high interest in your project is your most important stakeholder, and you're going to be managing them very, very closely. And generally speaking, your project team, the project initiator, the project sponsor, all of them would fit into your high segment. The second important group of stakeholders are those stakeholders who still have the high power, but their interest level is low in your project. A typical example of a stakeholder who fits into high power, low interest is government authorities from whom you need certain kind of approvals. Before we move on, your strategy for managing your high-low stakeholders is to keep them satisfied. So whatever their requirements are, fulfill them, and that should be good enough to manage them. The next two group of stakeholders both have low power, but one of them has high interest. So the group of stakeholder who has low power but high interest, the way you manage them is keep them informed, and that should be a good approach to be able to manage them effectively. Finally, you may have certain stakeholders who fit into the low power and the low interest group, and and the best way to manage them is just to monitor them. Normally they don't consume a lot of your bandwidth. Whatever they're asking for, every now and then you provide that information to them. However, as you can understand, the stakeholders who have high power and high interest, they would consume a lot of your bandwidth whenever it comes to communication, overall stakeholder engagement, and so on. So as you can see, we have used a grid which uses two parameters, and by applying a grid, you are able to group or categorize or prioritize your stakeholders into 4 segments. Another technique that you can use is called as a cube, and in the cube you have, instead of 2 parameters, 3 parameters, and normally when you apply 3 parameters you would be able to categorize your stakeholders into 8 groups. Now that we talked about project stakeholders, remember that project team is one of the segments from your stakeholders, and project team by definition are individuals who are contributing to your project or who are working on your project, and therefore they would be the ones who would make your project successful or fulfill all the project objectives. And when it comes to the project teams, understand that we are still in project initiation phase. All we have done until now is to be able to identify who they are. Fast forward to the planning phase, and usually somewhere in the early part of the planning phase where you've started to work on the scope is when you start to finalize what is called as a resource management plan. So now we have just identified the project teams. There are a few things that you would do along the way, and those would feed into what is your resource management plan. We'll talk a lot more about resource management plan after we discuss and cover project scope management in planning. For now, let's take an overview and see end to end how you would start to build your teams. So step number 1 is to know who they are, to identify who they are. We have done that as you identified your stakeholders. Once you know who the project team is, then you'd have to start to understand what skill level do they have and what skill level is required for them to be able to do the project successfully. For that, you might analyze their strengths and weaknesses, and by doing that you will define or develop the training needs of the project team. So all of that is the second step, which is that you're working on developing the team. This includes both developing the team technically from the skill set point of view, and also trying to make the team cohesive or work as one unit, one function, and that is developing the team as a whole. So you'll do several team development activities that can help you ensure that the team is working cohesively and they're all unified. And remember, we talked about project vision, and by having the whole team unified, having a one common view and vision and understanding, can help you successfully complete the project or have the project objectives delivered as expected. Which leads us to talk about monitoring the performance, which is that once you have developed the team will start to work on achieving the project objectives. And that's when you got to monitor the team in terms of whether they're able to deliver what is expected out of them, or are there any roadblocks, are there any challenges, do they have any problems, issues, hindrances that's limiting them to fulfill what is expected out of the team. This is what primarily monitoring performance is about. So to recap, it's fair to think of them as sequential steps. Step 1 is to know who the team is, which is to identify the team, and that was done as part of stakeholder identification. The next couple of steps is about determining what would the project teams need so that they would be able to deliver what's expected out of them. And in addition to that, we'll have to assess the team skills before we are assigning them work, so that any training need or any development required gets identified, and all of that will get captured in your resource management plan, which not only lists the roles and responsibilities of the project team, but also defines the training needs or the development needs of the project. And later on, when we talk a little bit more about the resource management plan, we'll also talk about leadership and how do you ensure that the project team is always motivated. So again, this is an overview of team management. You first identify them, you develop and enhance the teams, and then work has been assigned to them. And while the team is working, you're monitoring the performance to ensure that they have no challenges or roadblocks or issues. And to recap, the resource management plan will describe how you plan to train and develop the teams, how would you ensure that they are motivated, and as the scope of the project is defined, the resource management plan will define what the roles and responsibilities of the project teams are. As you start to build your team, it might be productive to have a team charter and the ground rules defined. A team charter describes what ideally should be the shared values for the team members, which therefore shapes up and establishes how the teams will do their work. And ground rules are a collection of do's and don'ts that defines the expected team behavior. And whenever ground rules are found to be broken, a good technique would be to brainstorm why whatever happened has happened and sit and discuss with the team, perhaps renegotiate with them and come up with a solution. That's conflict resolution. So overall, as you develop the team charter or as you develop the ground rules, it's always a good idea to sit with the team so that the team not only helps you to develop them, but by doing that, you have their complete buy-in and full agreement. These are the things that I wanted to discuss with you right now. We'll talk a little bit more about resource management plan because the things that we have discussed now feed into the resource management plan. And once we finish the scope planning part of the project, we will talk more about resource management plan. With that, we have covered everything that we wanted to talk about project initiation, which includes developing the project charter, identifying the stakeholders and analyzing them. Remember, this includes identifying your project team. And as you start to identify your project team, you start thinking of being able to build and develop your project team. If you've learned something new or if you found this video interesting, remember to subscribe. In our next clip, we'll talk more about all the different project methodologies. Until then, bye.